Garrett Sullivan stood outside Bella Vista with $52 folded in his wallet and the weight of another failed evening settling into his shoulders. The restaurant glowed warm through its windows, couples leaning close over candlelight laughter spilling into the December cold. He'd walked past this place 100 times on job sites, never imagining he'd try to step inside. Tonight felt different. Tonight felt like maybe he could borrow that warmth for an hour, buy 2 pasta dinners to go, give his kids something better than leftover pizza on New Year's Eve. The host looked up from his podium as Garrett approached, eyes traveling from the worn work boots to the navy shirt Garrett had ironed 3 times that afternoon. Professional smile, practiced distance. "Good evening, sir. Do you have a reservation?" Garrett gestured toward the half-empty dining room behind the host's shoulder tables, with reserved cards sitting untouched at 10:30 on the biggest night of the year. "No reservation, but I can see you've got some open tables. I'm just looking to order some food to go. 2 pasta dishes, whatever's quick." The host's smile tightened, a small shift that Garrett recognized from 1,000 interactions over 40 years of being measured by his paycheck instead of his character. "I'm afraid we're fully booked for the evening. Perhaps you'd be more comfortable at the diner on Columbus Avenue. They do excellent takeout." Heat crept up Garrett's neck, shame and anger mixing into something he'd learned to swallow without comment. He was turning toward the door, already planning the story he'd tell the kids about how the restaurant ran out of pasta, when a woman's voice cut through the ambient noise. "Excuse me. He's with me." Garrett stopped, looked back. A woman stood beside a corner table, tall and composed in a way that suggested she'd never been turned away from anything in her life. Black suit tailored to precision, dark hair pulled back, severe and elegant. No smile softening her expression. She didn't look at Garrett with pity or curiosity, just stated a fact and waited for the world to rearrange itself accordingly. The host's demeanor shifted immediately, spine-straightening smile becoming genuine. "Ms. Ashford, I apologize, I didn't realize this gentleman was with your party. Please, sir, right this way." Garrett met the woman's eyes across 15 feet of expensive flooring, saw something there he couldn't quite name. Permission, maybe. Or recognition of a particular kind of loneliness that transcended tax brackets and reservation lists. He walked toward her table because standing frozen would have been worse, because his kids were waiting at home with Mrs. Kowalski, because this stranger had just saved him from the kind of small humiliation that carved itself deep. She sat as he approached, gestured to the chair across from her, with a slight tilt of her head. 3 sets of silverware gleamed at each place setting. Garrett had used 1 fork his entire life, never needed backups. "You didn't have to do that." Her eyes stayed level with his, assessing without judgment. "I know, but I wanted to." Garrett pulled out the chair, sat carefully, hyper-aware of his calloused hands against the white tablecloth. "Why?" She picked up her wine glass, didn't drink, just held it like she needed something to do with her hands. "Because I've been sitting alone at restaurant tables for 2 years, and watching someone else be turned away felt wrong." The words landed with more weight than their simplicity suggested. Garrett studied her face, found lines around her eyes that spoke of long hours and longer nights, a tightness in her jaw that he recognized from his own mirror. "I'm Garrett Sullivan. Victoria Ashford." No handshake, no corporate pleasantries. Just names exchanged like a bargain, neither of them quite understood yet. A waiter appeared, young and efficient, placed a menu in front of Garrett without acknowledging the class disparity written all over this interaction. Victoria waved away her own menu. "I've already ordered, but please get whatever you'd like." Garrett opened the menu, scanned prices that made his stomach clench, found the cheapest pasta dish and closed it again. Victoria's eyes tracked the movement, too smart to miss what it meant. "The carbonara here is exceptional, and the portions are generous enough that you could take half home." Understanding passed between them, quiet and careful. She was offering him dignity wrapped in a restaurant recommendation. Garrett nodded once. Carbonara sounds good. The waiter took his order, refilled Victoria's wine, asked if Garrett wanted something to drink. Water would be free. Beer would be $5 he couldn't spare. He asked for water. Victoria set down her wine glass as the waiter left, folded her hands on the table, and Garrett noticed she wasn't wearing a wedding ring. Pale band of skin on her left hand suggested she had been recently enough that the tan line hadn't faded. "What do you do, Garrett?" "Straight to it, then. No dancing around the obvious differences between them." "Carpenter. Master carpenter technically, but that just means I've been doing it long enough to know how much I still don't know. Commercial construction, mostly some custom residential work when I can get it." "Custom work." Interest sparked in her voice, genuine rather than polite. "What kind?" "Built-ins furniture restoration. Anything that requires actual joinery instead of just screwing pieces together and calling it craftsmanship." A small smile touched the corner of her mouth there and gone. "You sound passionate about it." "It's honest work. You build something right, it outlasts you. That matters." Victoria tilted her head slightly, studying him with new attention. "Most people I know measure success by how much money something makes, not how long it lasts." "Different worlds, probably." "Probably." She paused, took a small sip of wine. "I run a tech company. Software solutions, AI integration, all the buzzwords that sound impressive in boardrooms and mean nothing at dinner parties. We build things that become obsolete in 18 months. Garrett heard the edge in her voice, disappointment, or maybe just exhaustion with the whole enterprise. "Sounds lonely." Her eyes widened slightly, surprise breaking through that careful composure. "It is. How did you... Building things that don't last means never getting to see your work matter. Must feel like running on a treadmill." Silence stretched between them, but comfortable now, the kind that happens when two people stop performing and start actually seeing each other. The restaurant buzzed around them, countdown clock above the bar showing 47 minutes until midnight, strangers gathering close in preparation for manufactured celebration. "Do you have family, Garrett?" The question came soft, almost tentative, like she wasn't sure she had the right to ask. He thought about Iris sleeping in her rocket ship pajamas, Finn clutching the stuffed elephant that used to be his mother's. Both of them curled together in a bed built for one because his apartment only had 2 bedrooms, and fathers didn't get to be selfish about space. 2 kids. Iris is 9, smart as hell, and twice as stubborn. Finn's about to turn 7, thinks he's going to be an astronaut artist when he grows up. Victoria's expression shifted, something warm breaking through the cool exterior. "That's wonderful. Where are they tonight?" "Home with our neighbor, Mrs. Kowalski. She's basically their grandmother at this point. I was supposed to be working late." He gestured vaguely at the restaurant at this impossible situation. "Thought I'd bring them back something nice for once." "And their mother," the question everyone asked, dancing around the real thing they wanted to know. Garrett had learned to answer quickly, rip the bandage off before people could get uncomfortable. "Died 3 years ago. Car accident, drunk driver over before the ambulance arrived." Victoria's hand moved across the table, stopped just short of touching his, hovered there for a heartbeat before she pulled it back. "I'm so sorry." "Thank you. It gets less sharp, but it never really stops hurting." "No." Her voice caught slightly. "It wouldn't." The waiter arrived with Garrett's carbonara, steam rising from the plate, portion size that could feed him and both kids tomorrow. Victoria had ordered salmon, barely touched it, seemed more interested in the conversation than the food that probably cost $40 a plate. "What about you?" Garrett cut into the pasta, aware he was probably using the wrong fork, deciding not to care. "Family, divorced 2 years ago. My ex-husband wanted children. I couldn't give him that, so he found someone who could." The words came flat, reciting facts instead of feeling them. Garrett recognized the tone, had used it himself often enough when talking about Emily. That must have been hard. Surprise flickered across her face again, like genuine sympathy was unexpected. It was, but being alone is harder. She picked at her salmon fork, pushing food around without eating. I keep thinking if I work enough, achieve enough, maybe I won't notice the empty apartment or the phone that never rings after business hours. Does it work? No. The honesty hung between them, raw and real. Garrett ate his carbonara, let the silence stretch, gave her space to decide if she wanted to keep going down this road of truth-telling with a stranger. The clock above the bar ticked closer to midnight. 32 minutes, now couples starting to drift toward the windows for the view of whatever fireworks the city had planned. I thought about not coming tonight. Victoria's voice came quiet, almost lost in the restaurant noise. Sitting at home seemed pathetic, but sitting here alone seemed worse. Then I saw you at the door and recognized that look on your face. What look? The one that says you're tired of being invisible. The words hit deeper than they should have struck something Garrett kept buried under single dad responsibilities and worksite competence. He set down his fork, met her eyes across the table. Yeah, that's exactly it. Victoria lifted her wine glass and Garrett raised his water, and they sat there like that as the countdown began somewhere in the restaurant's depths. 10, 9, 8. Strangers joined by nothing except a shared understanding of what it meant to be alone in a room full of people pretending connection came easy. 3, 2, 1. Happy New Year. They touched glasses, slight clink barely audible over the cheers and noisemakers. Neither of them smiled. Neither of them looked away. A moment stretched and held something fragile taking shape between them, too new to name, but solid enough to feel. Victoria's phone buzzed on the table screen, lighting up with "Dad calling" in bold letters. She glanced down, expression closing off, and declined the call without hesitation. The phone went dark again, and whatever door had opened in her face slammed shut just as fast. Don't you want to answer that? Some calls aren't worth taking, even on New Year's Eve. Her voice had gone cold again, executive returning to replace the woman who'd been honest about being lonely. Especially on New Year's Eve. Garrett wanted to ask more, knew better than to push. People had their reasons for dodging family calls at midnight, and those reasons were usually complicated enough that strangers at restaurant tables shouldn't go digging. He finished his carbonara, signaled the waiter for a to-go box, started the mental calculation of how this meal would affect his budget for the rest of the week. Victoria's hand appeared with a credit card before the check even arrived, placed it on the table with finality. My invitation, my treat. I can't let you pay for, you didn't let me do anything. I made a choice. Let me own it. Pride wanted him to argue. Common sense told him to shut up and accept the kindness. Common sense won. The waiter processed Victoria's card, brought back the receipt, handed Garrett his pasta in a container that probably cost more than the ingredients. Garrett stood suddenly aware this strange interlude was ending, that he'd walk out that door and likely never see this woman again. Thank you. For everything. For saving me from being turned away for dinner, for... He trailed off, couldn't quite articulate what else she'd given him. Just thank you. Victoria stood as well, extended her hand for a proper shake this time. Her grip was firm, professional, but her eyes held something warmer. Thank you for reminding me what honest conversation feels like. They shook hands for 3 seconds longer than business required, neither quite ready to let go of whatever this had been. Then Garrett released her hand, picked up his to-go box, and walked toward the exit. At the door, he looked back once. Victoria stood beside her table watching him leave, and for just a moment, she looked as lost as he felt. The cold air outside hit hard after the restaurant's warmth, midnight crowds already dispersing. New Year, just another night after all the buildup. Garrett walked to his truck, parked 3 blocks away, set the pasta carefully on the passenger seat, and sat behind the wheel without starting the engine. His reflection stared back from the rearview mirror, 40 years old and alone on the first minute of a new year, but somehow less lonely than he'd felt in months. He drove home through empty streets, carried the to-go box up 3 flights of stairs to his apartment in Hayes Valley. Mrs. Kowalski dozed on his couch television playing some old movie she'd seen 100 times. She startled awake as he entered, checked her watch, saw it was nearly 1 in the morning. "You're late, dear. Kids asked about you." Garrett set the pasta in the fridge, pulled out his wallet to pay her the $20 they'd agreed on for babysitting. Work ran longer than expected. Mrs. Kowalski tucked the money into her cardigan pocket, studying him with eyes that had watched him become a widower, a single father, a man trying to hold himself together with carpentry and stubbornness. "You look different." "Just tired." "No, something else. Lighter, maybe." She patted his arm, collected her purse, let herself out with the ease of someone who'd been doing this routine for 3 years. Garrett locked the door behind her, moved through his small apartment toward the kids' bedroom. 2-bedroom place, barely 900 square feet rent that climbed every year while his paycheck stayed flat. But it was home, and it was theirs. Iris and Finn shared the 2nd bedroom, had since they moved here after Emily died. Bunk beds that Garrett built himself. Iris on bottom because Finn was afraid of heights and she was brave enough to take the scary spot. They'd shifted in sleep, both ended up on the bottom bunk. Iris's arm thrown protective across her brother's shoulders. Garrett stood in the doorway studying his children in the dim glow of their astronaut nightlight. Iris's face serious even in sleep. Finn clutching his stuffed elephant like a lifeline. The weight of loving them pressed against his chest, familiar ache that never quite went away. Being their father was the only thing he'd ever done that mattered more than the work of his hands. He crossed to the bunk bed, adjusted their blankets, pressed a kiss to each forehead. On the wall above the bed, a framed photograph showed 4 people who used to be a family. Emily laughing, sun in her hair, Iris barely 6, and Finn just a toddler. Happy ending interrupted by drunk drivers and bad timing. Garrett touched the frame lightly, same ritual he'd performed every night for 3 years. "Met someone tonight, Em." Whispering to Ghost's habit he couldn't break and didn't want to. "Don't know why I'm telling you this, but she looked at me like I mattered. Been a while since someone did that." Finn stirred, mumbled something about rocket ships, settled back into sleep. Garrett watched them a moment longer, then backed out of the room and pulled the door mostly closed. His own bedroom waited across the hall, barely big enough for a queen bed and a dresser window overlooking the street where his truck sat locked and aging. He didn't turn on the light, just stripped down to his boxers and climbed into bed that still felt too big for one person. Sleep wouldn't come easy, never did on holidays that emphasized what he'd lost. But tonight felt different. Tonight he kept thinking about a woman who paid for his dinner and understood what it meant to be invisible despite success, lonely despite having everything society said should matter. Across the city, Victoria Ashford rode the elevator to her penthouse on the 40th floor, heels clicking against marble floors as she entered 2,800 square feet of precisely curated emptiness. Floor-to-ceiling windows showed the Golden Gate Bridge lit up against the night view, worth $4.2 million and counting. She dropped her purse on the entry table, walked through rooms that could have housed a family of 6, poured herself a glass of wine she wouldn't finish. The living room sprawled before her, designer furniture arranged by someone paid to make spaces look lived-in, art on the walls chosen by consultants who understood investment better than beauty. No family photos, no personal touches. Nothing that suggested a human being actually existed here between business hours. Just expensive objects occupying expensive space. Victoria carried her wine to the window, stood looking out at a city full of people celebrating connections she'd forgotten how to build. Her phone sat in her purse. Lawrence's missed call still showing on the screen probably wanted to lecture her about spending New Year's alone instead of attending whatever charity gala he'd been pushing her toward for weeks. The phone rang again. Simone, this time her younger sister, who somehow managed to build a life without turning into their father's definition of success. Victoria answered on the third ring. "Happy New Year, V. Let me guess you worked through midnight." Simone's voice came warm and teasing, comfortable enough with their relationship to call out Victoria's workaholic tendencies without cruelty. "Actually, I was at dinner." Silence on the other end, surprise thick enough to hear. "With who?" "A client, a stranger." "Excuse me?" Victoria moved away from the window, sank into the designer couch that had never been comfortable, let herself smile at the absurdity of explaining this. "A carpenter. Single father. I invited him to my table at Bella Vista because the host was being a judgmental ass." "Holy shit. Who are you, and what did you do with my sister?" "I'm asking myself the same question." Simone's laugh crackled through the speaker, genuine delight at this deviation from Victoria's usual patterns. "Tell me everything. What's his name? What did you talk about?" "Are you seeing him again?" "His name is Garrett Sullivan. We talked about work, loneliness, permanence. And no, I'm not seeing him again. It was just dinner. Just dinner that has you smiling for the first time in 2 years. Victoria opened her mouth to deny it, realized Simone was right. She was smiling small and hesitant, but real. Maybe. They talked for another 10 minutes, Simone sharing stories about her wedding planning business, the couple who wanted butterflies released at their ceremony, despite San Francisco's wind making that a terrible idea. Normal sister conversation, the kind Victoria rarely made time for between board meetings and product launches. When they hung up, the penthouse felt even emptier than before. Silence pressing in from all sides. Victoria finished her wine rinse, the glass went through her nighttime routine with mechanical precision. Climbed into a king-sized bed that made her feel small and lost, pulled Egyptian cotton sheets up to her chin. Sleep didn't come. She lay there thinking about calloused hands and honest eyes, a man who built things meant to outlast him, children waiting at home who believed their father hung the moon. Thought about her own life, 42 years of climbing ladders and checking boxes, achieving everything except the things she actually wanted. The city glittered outside her window, millions of lives intersecting and diverging. One random connection made over restaurant tables and rejected calls. Victoria closed her eyes and tried to remember the last time she'd felt seen rather than assessed, heard rather than evaluated. The memory wouldn't come nothing before tonight, just Garrett Sullivan saying loneliness recognizes loneliness, even across crowded rooms. Morning arrived gray and cold, January 1st stretching empty ahead. Garrett woke at 6:30 from habit body clock, ignoring holidays and hangovers he didn't have. The apartment sat quiet, kids still sleeping, rare luxury of a morning without rushed schedules. He made coffee in the machine Emily had bought their first Christmas together, sat at the kitchen table with his laptop, checked emails he couldn't afford to ignore, even on New Year's Day. 3 messages from Bobby, his foreman, all marked urgent. The Marina warehouse renovation was running behind schedule, supply chain issues, combining with weather delays, meaning the project that was supposed to wrap in February might stretch into April. Bobby's final email cut straight to the point: they'd be cutting crew by end of month, last hired first. Fired, make sure your work stays tight. Garrett had been on this crew for 18 months, not quite new enough to be first cut, but far from safe. He closed the laptop, rubbed his eyes, did the math he'd been avoiding for weeks. Rent going up in March. Iris needing new shoes because 9-year-olds grew faster than budgets allowed, Finn's art supplies running low. Savings account holding $1,200 that was supposed to be emergency money, but kept getting raided for regular emergencies like food and electricity. The coffee tasted bitter. Or maybe that was just the morning after hope meeting reality. Last night at Bella Vista felt like a dream, now expensive pasta and conversations with women who lived in different universes. Today was construction sites and overdue bills and being a single father who couldn't quite make the numbers work no matter how many hours he put in. After breakfast, after dishes, after getting both kids dressed and ready for the day, Garrett checked his phone and found a missed call from Declan O'Brien. His old mentor, the carpenter who'd taught him everything about joinery and craftsmanship, rarely called on holidays. Garrett returned it, stepping onto the small balcony that passed for outdoor space. "Lad, Happy New Year. Got something for you." Declan's voice came rough from 40 years of sawdust and cigarettes he'd quit a decade too late. "Yeah, what's that?" "Remember you mentioned needing more work. Got a contact asking about custom furniture. High-end stuff, office renovation. Good money if you can handle the timeline." Garrett's heart kicked up, hope and suspicion mixing equally. "What's the catch?" "No catch, just business. Client saw some of your work on my portfolio, wants to meet. You available Monday? Monday works. Who's the client? Victoria Ashford. Runs some tech company downtown. Real professional, pays on time, knows quality when she sees it." The world tilted slightly. Coincidence too perfect to believe. Garrett gripped the balcony railing, watched morning fog roll through the street below. "Victoria Ashford. You know her. We've met." Declan chuckled, knowing and amused. "That's so. Well, she specifically asked for you after I showed her the built-ins you did for the Hendersons. Wants to discuss a 3-month project, custom conference tables, and executive furniture. Pays $80 an hour if you can deliver." 3 months at $80 an hour. Garrett did the math automatically, numbers too good to be real. $28,000, nearly 7 months of his current salary, chance to prove himself beyond construction sites and tight deadlines. "I'm interested. What's the next step?" "She'll text you details. I gave her your number. Hope that's all right." Yeah, that's fine. Thanks, Deck." "Don't thank me yet. Just do good work and make me look smart for recommending you." They hung up. Garrett stood on the balcony holding his phone, wondering if Victoria had planned this or if the universe was playing games with them both. His phone buzzed before he could decide, message from an unknown number appearing on screen. "Garrett, this is Victoria Ashford. Declan O'Brien gave me your contact information. Would you be available to meet tomorrow morning to discuss a potential project? I can come to you if that's easier. Victoria." Professional, polite. No mention of carbonara, or loneliness, or midnight toasts. Garrett typed a response, deleted. It tried again. "Victoria, good to hear from you. Tomorrow morning works. My work site is in the marina, but I'm flexible on location. Garrett." Her reply came within minutes. "How about the Ferry Building Farmers Market, 9 a.m., less formal than an office, and I need to pick up groceries anyway." Garrett stared at the message, reading between lines that suggested she wanted neutral ground, wanted this to feel organic rather than orchestrated. Or maybe she just actually needed groceries. Either way, he found himself smiling. "Ferry Building at 9. See you then." Monday morning arrived, clear and cold, rare San Francisco sunshine cutting through winter's usual gray. Garrett, dressed in his good jeans and a flannel shirt, dropped the kids at school early so he could make the 9 o'clock meeting. Drove his aging F-150 across the city, parked near the Ferry Building, arrived 15 minutes early because being late felt disrespectful when someone was offering you work. The farmers market sprawled across the plaza, vendors selling organic produce and artisan bread, families browsing tables laden with winter vegetables and early strawberries. Garrett walked among the crowds, hands in his pockets, scanning for Victoria's composed figure among the casual shoppers. He found her at a vegetable stand inspecting heirloom tomatoes like they held answers to questions she hadn't asked yet. No business suit today, just expensive-looking jeans and a Patagonia jacket, hair down around her shoulders instead of pulled back severe. She looked younger, more approachable still, obviously wealthy, but trying to blend into the weekend crowd. Garrett approached from the side, didn't want to startle her. "Those are $12 a pound. Must be special tomatoes." Victoria turned, smiled with what looked like relief. "Garrett, you're early. Contractor habit. Show up on time or don't bother showing up at all." She set down the tomato she'd been examining, wiped her hands on her jeans gesture, so normal it made her seem more human than the woman who'd rescued him from Bella Vista's host. "I appreciate punctuality. Want to walk while we talk." They moved through the market together, Victoria occasionally stopping to examine produce, Garrett content to follow her lead, and let her set the pace for whatever conversation was coming. "I should be honest about something." Victoria tucked kale into her canvas bag, didn't look at Garrett as she spoke. "I reached out to Declan before New Year's Eve. Asked him if he knew any skilled carpenters for a project I'm planning. So, Friday night was complete coincidence. I didn't recognize you when I saw you at the host stand. Didn't make the connection until after you left and I looked at the business card Declan had given me." Garrett processed this measuring truth against what he wanted to believe. "But you still want to hire me?" "I want to hire you because Declan says you're the best carpenter he's worked with in 30 years. The fact that we've met before is irrelevant to your qualifications." Professional answer, clean and clear, but something in her tone suggested this was more complicated than pure business. "What's the project?" Victoria led them toward a quieter section of the market, away from the main crowds, found a bench near the water where they could sit and talk without shouting over vendor calls and music. "Ashford Digital Solutions is renovating our headquarters, moving from leased office space to a building we own in Soma. I want custom furniture throughout, conference tables, executive desks, built-in shelving, something permanent." She met his eyes, held his gaze. "I want pieces my grandchildren could use." "You said you couldn't have children." The words came out before Garrett could stop them, too personal for a business conversation. Victoria flinched slightly, not offended, but surprised by his memory. "I can't. But the sentiment stands. I want to build something with legacy." Garrett studied her face, saw the same loneliness from Friday night hiding behind professional composure. "What's the timeline and budget?" 3 months for the initial installation, $80 an hour estimated, 350 hours of work. Materials covered separately. You'd have workspace in our current building, flexible hours as long as deadlines are met. $28,000 give or take. Enough to cover the rent increase, build his savings back up, maybe take the kids somewhere special this summer. Enough to change their lives from precarious to stable, at least for a while. That's generous. It's market rate for your skill level. I don't do charity, Garrett. I need someone who won't cut corners just to finish faster." Her tone had gone sharp defensive, like she expected him to accuse her of pity disguised as business. Garrett recognized the feeling had worn that armor himself often enough. "I appreciate the offer, but I need you to understand something. This is business. I deliver quality work, you pay agreed rates. No favors, no special treatment because we had dinner once." "Agreed." They shook hands, formal and professional, sealing an arrangement that felt heavier than simple employment. As their hands met, Garrett noticed Victoria's palm was soft where his was calloused, her grip firm, despite the difference in their physical strength. They held the shake a second longer than necessary, neither quite ready to let go of this fragile connection they were trying to define. A child's voice broke through the moment, high and excited, coming from somewhere behind them. Garrett turned, saw Iris and Finn running toward him through the market crowd, Mrs. Kowalski following at a slower pace with her shopping bags. "Dad, we saw you from the bus." Finn crashed into Garrett's legs, all energy and enthusiasm, while Iris approached more cautiously, taking in Victoria with careful assessment. "Hey, buddy, I thought you guys were at home with Mrs. K." Mrs. Kowalski reached them slightly out of breath, smiling her grandmother smile. "We decided to make a morning of it. Farmer's market, then the playground." She noticed Victoria extended a hand with old-world courtesy. "I'm Agnes Kowalski, the children's babysitter and Garrett's neighbor." Victoria shook her hand, something warming in her expression. "Victoria Ashford. I'm discussing a work project with Garrett." Finn tugged on Garrett's hand, pointing at Victoria with the blunt honesty of 6-year-olds. "You're the lady from the restaurant Dad said you were nice." Heat crept up Garrett's neck as Victoria's eyebrows rose, surprise and something like pleasure crossing her face. "Did he now?" Iris stepped forward, protective instinct kicking in, putting herself slightly between Victoria and her brother. "Are you Dad's boss?" Victoria knelt down to Iris's eye-level movement, graceful despite expensive jeans and morning formality. "I'm hoping to be his client. That means I'd hire him to build furniture for my company." "My dad's really good at building stuff." "I've heard that. Declan O'Brien says he's the best." Iris studied Victoria with 9-year-old intensity, weighing and measuring, deciding if this woman was trustworthy enough to be near their father. "What kind of furniture? Tables, desks, shelves, things that need to be strong and beautiful." "Dad can do that. He built our bunk beds and they're perfect." Pride flickered across Victoria's face, genuine interest in these children who guarded their father like treasure. "I'm sure they are." Mrs. Kowalski took Finn's hand, gestured toward a fruit stand. "Come on, you two. Let's pick out some apples while your father finishes his meeting." Iris hesitated, looked at Garrett for permission before following. He nodded, watched his children walk away with Agnes, then turned back to Victoria, who was standing now brushing invisible dirt off her jeans. "They're wonderful. They're everything." Something passed between them, unspoken recognition that Garrett's children were his first priority and always would be. Victoria's expression shifted, became more guarded. "I meant what I said about this being business, Garrett, but I should also be clear about boundaries." "Boundaries? I like you. I enjoyed our conversation Friday night, but I'm not looking for complications, and single fathers with children come with significant complications." The words stung more than they should have, rejection dressed up as honesty. Garrett kept his expression neutral, defaulted to the professional distance she was establishing. "Understood. Client and contractor, nothing else." "I didn't say nothing else. I said I'm not looking for complications. There's a difference." "Is there?" Victoria met his eyes, held his gaze without flinching. "I don't know yet, but I'd like to find out. Carefully." Garrett thought about Iris's protective stance, Finn's immediate trust, his own heart still learning how to feel things besides grief and responsibility. "Carefully works for me." "Good." She pulled a business card from her jacket pocket, handed it over with practiced ease. "Report Monday morning, 8 a.m. Security will be expecting you." "I'll be there." Victoria shouldered her canvas bag, started to walk away, then turned back. "Garrett, thank you for sharing your table at the market. Your kids, I mean. That was generous. They ambushed me. Not much sharing involved. Still, it mattered." She left Vami before he could respond, disappeared into the crowd with her organic kale and whatever thoughts she wasn't saying out loud. Garrett stood holding her business card, watching the space where she'd been trying to understand what had just happened and what it might mean. Monday morning, Garrett arrived at Ashford Digital Solutions with his tool chest and a nervous energy he hadn't felt since his first commercial job 2 decades ago. The building rose modern and glass-wrapped in soma, reflecting clouds and neighboring structures in geometric patterns that spoke of money and ambition. Security waved him through after checking his ID against Victoria's authorization, directed him to the 3rd floor where an empty conference room had been converted into temporary workspace. The room stretched 20 feet by 30 windows overlooking the street, drop cloths already laid across expensive carpeting. Someone had arranged his workspace with care table saw positioned near the outlet, lumber stacked against the far wall, even a small refrigerator stocked with water bottles. Victoria's doing, though she hadn't mentioned it. He spent the morning taking measurements, sketching initial designs for the conference table that would anchor the executive boardroom. The work settled him familiar calculations and planning that let his mind focus on grain patterns and load-bearing capacity, instead of whatever complicated thing was building between him and the woman who signed his paychecks. Victoria appeared around noon carrying 2 sandwiches from the deli downstairs. "Thought you might be hungry." Garrett set down his measuring tape, accepted the sandwich with surprise that felt unearned. "You didn't have to do that." "I know. But the deli makes excellent pastrami and eating alone seemed wasteful." They sat on folding chairs near the window, unwrapped sandwiches that probably cost $15 each, ate in comfortable silence while the city moved below them. Victoria had changed from the casual market clothes into her executive uniform-tailored pants and a silk blouse, hair pulled back severe and professional. The transformation made her seem unreachable again, CEO, rather than the woman who'd bought organic kale. "How's the initial assessment going?" Garrett gestured toward his sketches spread across the makeshift workbench. "Good. The oak you specified will work well for the conference table, but I'm thinking walnut accents for the joinery. Adds visual interest without competing with the grain." Victoria leaned forward, studied the drawings with genuine interest rather than polite acknowledgement. "You're thinking about aesthetics as much as function." "They're not separate. Beautiful things work better because people care about maintaining them." She smiled small and private, like he'd confirmed something she already suspected. "That's why I hired you." They finished eating. Victoria collected the sandwich wrappers and disappeared back to whatever CEO responsibilities filled her afternoons. Garrett returned to his measurements and planning, losing himself in the meditative process of translating vision into precise dimensions. Hours passed unmarked except by changing light through the window's afternoon, bleeding into early evening before he realized how late it had gotten. His phone buzzed with a text from Mrs. Kowalski, reminding him she had the kids until 6 Bridge Club ran late on Mondays. Garrett checked the time, saw 5:45, started packing his tools for the day. Movement in the doorway made him look up. Victoria standing there with her coat already on purse over one shoulder. "Heading out?" "Yeah, kids are expecting me." He closed his tool chest, didn't mention the sandwich or the stocked refrigerator or any of the small kindnesses she kept offering without acknowledgement. "Thanks for lunch, by the way." "You're welcome. Same time tomorrow? I'll be here at 8. Victoria hesitated in the doorway, something unspoken hovering between them, then nodded once and left. Garrett finished packing, locked the workspace behind him, rode the elevator down with junior developers and project managers. People young enough that 40 felt ancient and single parenthood seemed impossibly far from their immediate concerns. Work became his refuge over the following weeks, space where competence mattered more than emotional complexity. The conference table took shape under his hands, oak joined with walnut accents, every joint perfect, because excellence was the only standard worth pursuing. Victoria stopped by most afternoons, sometimes with sandwiches, sometimes just to check progress, their conversation staying carefully professional, even when eyes lingered longer than business required. 3 weeks into the project, Victoria texted asking if she could visit on a Friday evening, bring dinner as thanks for his excellent work. Garrett hesitated, knowing this crossed from professional into personal territory, agreed anyway, because refusing felt cowardly and he'd spent too many years being careful to protect himself from connection. Friday arrived cold and clear, February settling into San Francisco with unusual sunshine and persistent chill. Garrett left work at 5, picked up the kids, came home to clean the apartment with more thoroughness than usual. Iris noticed his nervous energy, asked questions he deflected with vague answers about a work friend visiting. At 6:30, Victoria knocked, carrying flowers for Garrett and an expensive art supply set for Finn intuition, or research, revealing what would matter most to a 6-year-old who lived for creating. Iris answered the door, studied Victoria with the same careful assessment from the farmers. Market stepped aside to let her enter. Finn appeared from his bedroom, spotted the art supplies lit up with pure joy that made Victoria's formal composure crack into genuine warmth. "You remember Dad said you were nice, but this is really nice." Garrett accepted the flowers with awkwardness he couldn't quite hide, found a vase that had belonged to Emily, filled it with water, while Victoria settled onto their worn couch. Like expensive clothes, didn't matter in spaces built for comfort rather than impression. The apartment looked smaller with her in it, her elegance highlighting every scratch and stain. But she didn't seem to notice or care about the gap between her world and theirs. Dinner was spaghetti carbonara, Emily's recipe that Garrett had memorized through repetition and desperate need to give his children something their mother had made with love. He cooked while Victoria helped Iris set the table, their conversation drifting from school to science projects to books Iris loved. Finn showed her his drawings, pulled out the family portrait with the empty space where Emily should have been, explained without prompting that sometimes he still drew his mom there because she belonged even if she was gone. Victoria's eyes filled with tears. She blinked away quickly, voice steady when she told Finn that love didn't disappear just because people did, that his mother lived in all the ways he remembered her. Garrett watched from the kitchen, saw this wealthy CEO kneeling beside his son, speaking truth about grief with the kind of understanding that only came from personal experience. They ate together at the small table, conversation flowing easier than Garrett expected, Victoria asking genuine questions about the kids' lives and listening to answers like they mattered. Iris warmed gradually, defenses lowering as she realized Victoria wasn't performing interest, but actually cared. Finn talked non-stop, excitement overriding his usual shyness, telling elaborate stories about his paintings and the adventures he imagined for his stuffed elephant. After dinner, after Finn showed Victoria every drawing in his collection, and Iris demonstrated the science fair project she was building, Garrett sent them to brush teeth and put on pajamas. The apartment settled into quieter rhythm, just adults and the complexity of whatever they were dancing around without naming. Victoria helped clear dishes, standing at his sink, washing plates, while he dried domestic scene that felt simultaneously normal and surreal. She'd removed her blazer, rolled up her sleeves, looked more relaxed than he'd seen her since that first night at Bella Vista. "Your kids are incredible. They're everything." She handed him a plate, fingers brushing his for a moment that lasted longer than accident would explain. "Emily was lucky to have you. To have this." Victoria gestured vaguely at the apartment, the evidence of family everywhere in drawings and photos and shoes scattered near the door. "I grew up in a house 3 times this size and never felt as loved as your children clearly are." Garrett set down the plate, turned to face her properly. "What was it like growing up Ashford?" Victoria resumed, washing hands, moving through soapy water while her expression went distant. "My grandfather was a furniture maker in Vermont. I spent summers in his workshop learning about wood and patience. It's one of my only good memories from childhood." "What happened to him?" "Died when I was 12. My father said there was no money in craftsmanship, pushed me toward business school and corporate success. I listened because disagreeing with Lawrence Ashford wasn't an option in our house." The bitterness in her voice revealed depths Garrett was only beginning to understand. Family dynamics that made wealth feel like burden rather than blessing. "Do you regret it?" "The business path. I regret not knowing if I would have been happy doing something else. I built a successful company, but I don't know if I built a successful life." "Those aren't the same thing." "No, they're really not." They finished dishes in silence, comfortable now with the spaces between words. The kids emerged in pajamas. Finn requesting that Victoria see his bedroom, Iris reluctantly agreeing this would be acceptable. Garrett followed as they gave her the tour, Finn pointing out the bunk beds with pride, explaining that their dad had built them himself, and they were strong enough to hold elephants if elephants needed beds. Victoria examined Garrett's work, running her hands along the joints with appreciation that came from understanding craftsmanship. These are beautiful, perfect joinery. Dad says if you're going to make something, make it right. Iris spoke with absolute certainty, faith in her father's abilities unshakable. That's good advice. Victoria looked at Garrett over the children's heads, something passing between them that felt heavy with meaning. Your dad is very wise. Bedtime rituals proceeded with Victoria as unexpected audience, Garrett reading chapters from the fantasy novel while both kids listened raptly. Finn fell asleep first, losing his fight against exhaustion, somewhere around dragons and prophecies. Iris lasted longer, asking questions about plot and character, until her eyes finally closed mid-sentence. Garrett adjusted blankets, kissed foreheads, gestured for Victoria to follow him out. They stepped onto the fire escape that served as balcony cold air, shocking after the apartment's warmth. The city spread below them, lights beginning to emerge as dusk settled into full dark. Thank you for being good with them. It matters more than you probably realize. Victoria leaned against the railing, looking out at the urban landscape with expression that suggested she was seeing something far beyond traffic and buildings. They make it easy. Iris is protective of you, watching to make sure I'm not going to hurt you or disappoint them. Finn just wants someone else to show his art to. Both responses make perfect sense given what they've lost. Garrett moved beside her shoulders, nearly touching close enough to feel her warmth against the February chill. Can I ask about your ex, Preston? What about him? You said he wanted children, and you couldn't give him that. Was it medical or choice? Victoria was quiet long enough that Garrett thought she might not answer, might tell him the question crossed boundaries they'd agreed not to breach. When she spoke, her voice came flat and careful. Medical. Endometriosis severe enough that pregnancy became impossible. We tried for 3 years fertility treatments and hope that kept getting crushed month after month. Eventually, Preston decided he wanted biological children more than he wanted me. I'm sorry, that's brutal. It was. But he's engaged now to someone younger and fertile, probably having the family he always wanted. I get to run a company and eat dinner alone in a penthouse. Everyone gets what they deserve, right? The bitterness cut deep, self-directed anger mixing with grief for the life she'd imagined and lost. Garrett understood that particular pain, the way losing one future forced you to build another from scraps and stubbornness. For what it's worth, he's an idiot. You're worth more than your reproductive capacity. Victoria turned to look at him, surprise softening into something that might have been gratitude. Thank you for saying that. I mean it. They stood together, watching the city transform into its nighttime version. Thousands of lives unfolding in apartments and houses, each person carrying their own weight of loss and hope. Garrett felt the urge to reach for her hand, resisted, because boundaries mattered and moving too fast would ruin whatever fragile thing they were building. Emily died 3 years ago. Car accident, drunk driver. Instantaneous. The words came easier than expected. Muscle memory of grief making the telling almost mechanical. I was angry for a long time. Angry at the driver. Angry at God. Angry at Emily for leaving me alone with 2 kids and no idea how to be both parents at once. Victoria's hand found his gentle pressure that offered comfort without demanding response. How did you stop being angry? I didn't. I just got too tired to maintain it. Anger takes energy I needed for being a father. Do you ever regret it? Having kids? Never. Not once. They're the reason I survived losing her. Victoria squeezed his hand once released. It turned back toward the view. I envy that. Having something that matters enough to keep going. You have your company. I have a business that would replace me in 3 months if I disappeared. Not the same thing as being irreplaceable to actual humans. Garrett heard the loneliness underneath her words, the same isolation that had driven her to invite a stranger to her table on New Year's Eve. You matter to my kids. Finn hasn't stopped talking about the art supplies. Iris asked me earlier if you were going to visit again. What did you tell her? That I hoped so. Victoria smiled genuine and unguarded beauty that had nothing to do with expensive clothes or professional polish. I'd like that. They stayed on the fire escape until cold became uncomfortable, then moved back inside where warmth and the detritus of family life waited. Victoria collected her blazer prepared to leave, hesitated at the door like she wanted to say something important but couldn't quite find the words. Garrett, I need to be honest about something. I like you. I enjoy spending time with you and your children, but I'm terrified of disappointing them, of becoming important and then failing to show up the way they need. I understand that fear. I live it every day wondering if I'm enough for them. But you are enough. You're their father. And you're Victoria. That's allowed to be enough too. She studied his face, searching for something she either found or decided to believe in despite doubt. Then she stood on her toes and kissed his cheek, brief contact that sent electricity through his nervous system, pulled back before he could respond in kind. Good night, Garrett. Good night, Victoria. She left heels clicking down the stairs, sound fading into the building's ambient noise. Garrett locked the door, stood in his living room surrounded by evidence of her visit. Flowers on the counter and Finn's new art supplies spread across the coffee table. Something had shifted tonight, crossed from professional courtesy into genuine connection, and he didn't know whether to be excited or terrified by the implications. The following weeks fell into pattern, Victoria visiting 2 or 3 times after work helping Iris with math homework, while Garrett cooked dinner painting with Finn while rain hammered against windows. She integrated into their routine with surprising ease, learning the rhythms of bedtime and morning chaos becoming familiar enough that Finn started calling her Vicky, and Iris asked her opinion on science fair hypotheses. Garrett noticed the attachment forming, saw how his children's faces lit up when Victoria's name appeared on his phone, heard the disappointment when she had late meetings and couldn't visit. The speed worried him. Protective instinct screaming that letting them care this much was dangerous, when he had no guarantee Victoria would stay beyond the project's completion. But Victoria kept showing up, kept choosing presence over the easier option of professional distance. She attended Iris's parent-teacher conference when Garrett mentioned it, sat beside him while Mrs. Palmer detailed his daughter's academic strengths and social challenges. She chaperoned Finn's first-grade field trip to the aquarium, helped wrangle 6-year-olds through exhibits, while Garrett worked a job site he couldn't abandon. Small acts of showing up, the kind that built foundation for something more substantial than casual connection. February 6th arrived with Finn's 7th birthday, small celebration Garrett planned around budget constraints, and the reality that birthday parties for broke single dads meant homemade cake and cheap decorations. Kowalski brought her famous pierogi and stories about her grandson in Chicago. Declan showed up with a wooden toy truck he'd built in his workshop, intricate and beautiful in the way handmade things always were. A few kids from Finn's class arrived with parents Garrett barely knew, the social network of elementary school creating connections he navigated with determined friendliness. Victoria appeared an hour into the party carrying a wrapped box that looked expensive even before Finn tore off the paper. Inside, a professional-grade watercolor set, the kind serious artists used far beyond anything Garrett could have justified purchasing. Finn's eyes went wide with wonder, touching the paints like they were treasure, looking at Victoria with adoration that made Garrett's chest tighten with complicated emotion. This is too much. He kept his voice low, didn't want to embarrass her in front of the other parents, but needed her to understand the position this put him in. I can't accept gifts like this. Victoria's expression went cool defensive, walls rising against criticism she'd anticipated. It's Finn's birthday. I wanted to give him something that would help him create. That set costs $200. That's more than I spend on groceries in a week. Then maybe you should let people who have resources share them without making it about your pride. The words stung precisely because they contained truth wrapped in judgment. Other parents were watching now, sensing conflict, even if they couldn't hear details. Garrett forced a smile, decided this conversation would happen later when children weren't audience to adult complications. The party continued with cake and games, Finn opening other gifts that seemed modest beside Victoria's watercolors. When it came time to blow out candles, he closed his eyes and wished with the solemn intensity of 7-year-olds taking wishes seriously, then opened them and looked directly at Victoria. "I wished for you to stay forever, Vicky." Silence dropped across the gathered adults' weight of a child's honesty, creating awkwardness that no polite deflection could diffuse. Victoria's face went pale, trapped between Finn's expectation and her own uncertainty, struggling to find response that wouldn't devastate him, while also not making promises she couldn't guarantee keeping. "That's a lovely wish, Finn. I care about you and your dad and Iris very much." Not yes, not no diplomatic answer that satisfied a 7-year-old while leaving crucial questions unanswered. Garrett saw Iris watching from across the room, reading adult subtext with the particular skill of children forced to grow up understanding more than they should. His daughter knew something was wrong, knew Vicky's answer wasn't quite what Finn wanted, filed that knowledge away for later processing. The party wound down, parents collecting children and thanking Garrett for hosting Declan helping clean while Mrs. Kowalski boxed leftover cake. Victoria stayed quiet, helping put away decorations with mechanical efficiency, clearly shaken by Finn's wish and its implications. When the apartment emptied except for his family, Garrett sent the kids to wash up and change into pajamas, turned to Victoria with words he'd been formulating since the gift arrived. "We need to talk." Victoria set down the trash bag she'd been filling, crossed her arms in defensive posture he recognized as fear masquerading as control. "I know. You're right, the gift was too much. It's not just the gift, it's everything. You're here 3 nights a week, helping with homework and field trips and becoming part of their routine. Finn wishes for you to stay forever. Iris asks if you're my girlfriend. This is moving too fast. What do you want me to do? Stop visiting. I thought we were building something here." The pain in her voice cut through Garrett's frustration, reminded him this was hard for her too. That integrating into an existing family required courage when you'd spent 42 years believing you couldn't have children of your own. "I want us to be honest about what this is. You're not their mother. You can't replace Emily, and I need to protect them from getting attached to someone who might decide this is too complicated and walk away." Victoria flinched like he'd struck her hurt, flashing across features before anger took over. "You think I'd walk away after everything? I think you're scared. I think you care about us, but you're terrified of becoming responsible for their happiness when you don't trust yourself not to fail them." Truth landed between them, raw and undeniable. Victoria's arms dropped, fight draining into something that looked like defeat. "You're right. I am scared, terrified, actually, of disappointing them, of disappointing you, of becoming important and then proving I'm not capable of being what a family needs." Garrett wanted to close the distance, wanted to hold her and promise everything would work out, knew better than to make guarantees he couldn't control. Life had taught him that love wasn't enough to prevent loss, that wanting someone to stay didn't mean they would. "Then we need to slow down. Set boundaries. I can't let my kids fall in love with you if you're not sure you can stay." "I don't know how to be sure. I've never done this before." "Neither have I. Not the second time around, anyway." He ran his hands through his hair, exhaustion catching up with emotion. "But I know rushing into something this important without being certain is how people get hurt." Victoria nodded, slowly understanding, settling over her face even as disappointment clouded her eyes. "So, what do? We take a step back. I finish your project, you pay me for excellent work. We figure out if what we feel is real or just loneliness, making us grab for the nearest solution. And if it's real, then it'll still be real when we've had time to be certain." She collected her purse, pulled on the coat she'd draped over his worn armchair hours ago when the party was just beginning, and complications felt manageable. At the door, she turned back one last time. I care about you, Garrett, about all of you. But you're right that I'm not ready for this. Not at this speed. I know. Can we still be friends while we figure it out? Yeah, we can do that. Victoria left without the kiss on the cheek she'd given him before, just a small wave and a sad smile before the door closed, and Garrett was alone with the mess of a birthday party and the heavier mess of feelings he couldn't quite organize. Iris emerged from her bedroom already in pajamas, studying him with Emily's eyes. Is Vicky mad at us? No, sweetheart, she's not mad. But she's not coming back, is she? Not like before. The question broke something in Garrett's chest, confirmation that his 9-year-old daughter had read the situation with perfect clarity. I don't know yet. We need some time to think. Iris nodded, accepting this with the resignation of a child who'd already learned that adults couldn't always fix things or make them stay. She hugged him goodnight, squeezed tighter than usual, went back to her room where Finn was already asleep, surrounded by birthday gifts and impossible wishes. The following 3 weeks crawled past with Victoria's absence carving holes through routine. She texted occasionally about the project, professional updates that carefully avoided anything personal. Garrett finished the conference table started on executive desks, poured himself into work because craftsmanship didn't require emotional navigation, and joints either fit or they didn't without ambiguity. The kids noticed her absence, immediately asked questions. Garrett deflected with vague explanations about work keeping Victoria busy. Finn drew pictures for her that never got delivered, tucked them into a folder he kept beside his bed. Iris stopped asking after the first week, withdrew into herself the way she had after Emily died. Protective mechanisms kicking in to guard against further loss. Garrett hated watching them hurt, hated knowing he'd caused this by letting Victoria get close before being certain she could handle the weight of their need. But he also knew protecting them mattered more than his own loneliness, that being their father meant making hard choices, even when those choices felt like cutting out pieces of himself. Declan visited the workspace one afternoon, ostensibly to check Garrett's progress, actually, to deliver wisdom disguised as casual observation. So you scared her off, did you? Garrett looked up from the desk joint he was fitting, wiped sawdust from his hands. I didn't scare her off. We agreed to slow down. Slowing down and stopping aren't the same thing, lad. This looks like stopping. She needs time to figure out if she actually wants this or if she's just lonely and we're convenient. Declan leaned against the workbench, studied Garrett with the patience of someone who'd seen enough life to recognize self-sabotage when it appeared. You know what I think? I think you're the one who's scared. Scared of wanting someone again and losing them like you lost Emily. So you're testing Victoria, seeing if she'll fight for you or run when it gets complicated. The accuracy stung truth Garrett had been avoiding crystallized in his mentor's observation. Maybe. But the kids need to see their father take risks on happiness, need to learn that loving people is worth it even when it's scary. You're teaching them the wrong lesson here. Declan left before Garrett could formulate a defense, walked away with the infuriating certainty of people who saw through your justifications to the fear underneath. Garrett returned to his joinery hands, performing familiar work, while his mind circled the question of whether he'd been protecting his children or protecting himself. Across the city, Victoria buried herself in work with the same desperate energy she'd employed after her divorce. 80-hour weeks, product launches, and investor meetings, anything to avoid the empty penthouse and the memory of spaghetti dinners and children who'd started calling her Vicky like she belonged. Simone noticed first, called her out during their monthly sister lunch, that Victoria almost canceled before guilt overrode avoidance. You look terrible, V. When did you last sleep? Victoria pushed salad around her plate, expensive greens that tasted like cardboard. I sleep fine. You're lying. You've got circles under your eyes, and you're doing that thing where you check your phone every 30 seconds, like you're expecting news that never comes. I'm busy with work. No, you're hiding in work, What happened with the carpenter? Victoria set down her fork, gave up the pretense of eating. His name is Garrett, and nothing happened. We decided we were moving too fast, needed space to figure things out. By we, you mean he told you to back off and you ran instead of fighting for what you wanted. It's more complicated than that. He has kids who are getting attached. I couldn't promise I wouldn't disappoint them. Simone reached across the table, took Victoria's hand with the fierce protectiveness of younger sisters who refused to watch their siblings sabotage happiness. Listen to me. You've spent your entire life letting fear make your decisions. Fear of disappointing Dad, fear of not being enough, fear of wanting things you think you don't deserve. When are you going to stop running from the people who actually see you? What if I fail them? What if I try and I'm terrible at being part of a family? Then you fail and try again. That's what actual humans do, V. We mess up and apologize and keep showing up anyway. Victoria pulled her hand back, wrapped her arms around herself against emotion that threatened to crack through carefully maintained composure. I don't know how to do that. I only know how to succeed or quit. Then learn. Go to Garrett and tell him you're scared, but you want to try anyway. Let him decide if that's enough instead of deciding for him. The conversation stayed with Victoria through the afternoon, needling at her through board meetings and conference calls, refusing to be dismissed with the same efficiency she applied to business problems. That evening, she stood in her penthouse, surrounded by expensive furniture and perfect emptiness. Pulled out her phone before courage could fade, typed a message to Garrett that felt simultaneously brave and terrifying. Can we talk? In person, I need to say things I can't text. His response came after 15 minutes that felt like hours. Coffee tomorrow morning, 9 a.m. at the place near my workspace. I'll be there. Victoria set down her phone, looked out at the city lights. Wondered if this was what hope felt like after spending months wrapped in protective numbness. Sleep came easier that night than it had in weeks, anticipation mixing with anxiety into something that felt dangerously close to possibility. Morning arrived with fog that would burn off by noon San Francisco at its most atmospheric. Victoria dressed carefully, professional enough for work, but softer than her usual CEO armor, walked to the coffee shop near Garrett's workspace, trying to organize thoughts that refused coherent arrangement. He was already there when she arrived, sitting at a corner table with 2 cups, one black coffee and one with cream, the way she preferred. She sat across from him, accepted the coffee with gratitude that felt inadequate for the gesture. Thank you for meeting me. Of course. Awkward silence stretched between them, 3 weeks of distance creating gaps where easy conversation used to flow. Victoria wrapped her hands around the warm cup, drew strength from the heat against her palms. I've been thinking about what you said, about being scared and moving too fast and not knowing if I could stay. The words came halting vulnerability she rarely showed, making each syllable feel exposed. You were right about all of it. I am terrified, but walking away didn't make the fear go away. It just made me lonely again. Garrett listened without interrupting, giving her space to work through thoughts she'd spent weeks trying to articulate. I don't know how to be part of a family. I grew up in a house where success mattered more than connection, where my father measured my worth by achievements instead of presence. Preston left because I couldn't give him children. I have no practice at being enough for people just by existing. Victoria. Let me finish. Please. She took a breath, steadied herself against the urge to retreat into familiar defenses. But spending time with you and Iris and Finn showed me something I didn't know I was missing. Showed me what it feels like to matter to people beyond what I can do or provide, and I want that. I want to try, even though I'm scared I'll fail. Garrett reached across the table, took her hand in his calloused warmth against her smooth uncertainty. I'm scared too. Scared of wanting you and losing you. Scared of my kids loving you and you deciding it's too hard. But Declan reminded me that being scared isn't reason enough to quit. What do we do then? We try. Carefully. Honestly. We communicate when things feel like too much, and we give each other permission to be imperfect at this. Victoria squeezed his hand, felt something unlock in her chest that had been closed since Preston's departure left her, certain she'd failed at the one thing society told her mattered most. I'd like that. The trying part. They finished their coffee talking about smaller things, updating each other on the past 3 weeks, like friends who'd been separated by circumstance rather than choice. When Garrett needed to get to his workspace, Victoria walked with him, stood in the doorway watching him check the conference table that was nearly complete, seeing evidence of his craftsmanship in every joint and surface. It's beautiful, Garrett. Everything I hoped for. She smiled, understanding the deeper meaning. My sister is getting married in June. Simone, she's been asking to meet you. Surprise crossed his features, followed by something that looked like cautious pleasure. Meet me. I told her about you, about how you made me remember what connection feels like. She wants to know the man who cracked through my armor. That's a lot of pressure. She's kind. You'll like her. And it would mean something to me having you there. Garrett set down the plane he'd been using to smooth wood, turned to face her fully. Then I'd be honored to meet her. They stood in the workspace, surrounded by sawdust and half-finished furniture, small moment that felt monumental in its implication. Victoria had invited him into her world not as contractor or casual acquaintance, but as someone who mattered enough to introduce to family. The gesture carried weight they both understood, promise of something more substantial than the careful distance they'd been maintaining. Over the following weeks, they rebuilt their connection slower this time, with boundaries that protected the kids while allowing relationship to develop. Victoria visited less frequently but more intentionally, staying for dinner, but leaving before bedtime routines, helping with homework, but not inserting herself into parent-teacher dynamics that belonged to Garrett alone. The adjustment felt awkward initially, both of them navigating terrain without clear maps. But gradually they found rhythm that honored everyone's needs. Iris warmed back up cautiously, still protective but willing to trust that Victoria wasn't disappearing completely. Finn accepted the new pattern with 7-year-old flexibility, just happy to have Vicky back even if she wasn't there every night. And Garrett found himself relaxing into something that felt sustainable, rather than intense relationship, building foundation, instead of rushing toward undefined destination. March arrived with unseasonable warmth. Victoria's project nearing completion, as the last pieces of custom furniture took shape under Garrett's skilled hands. They met regularly for coffee or lunch, conversations deepening as they learned each other beyond the surface attraction and shared loneliness that had brought them together initially. One evening in late March, Victoria's phone rang during dinner at Garrett's apartment. Lawrence's name appearing on the screen with the particular dread adult children felt when parental contact arrived unexpected. She excused herself, stepped onto the fire escape to answer, returned 10 minutes later with tension radiating from shoulders gone rigid. Everything okay? Victoria sat back down, picked at her pasta without eating. That was my father. He saw me leaving your building last week. Apparently, he was in the neighborhood for a consultation. Now he wants to meet you. Garrett felt his stomach drop, sudden awareness that meeting Victoria's retired judge father carried implications far beyond casual introduction. Meet me, Sunday dinner at his house. He's concerned about my choices, wants to assess whether I'm making another mistake. Bitterness edged her voice, years of paternal judgment surfacing in single sentence. I told him I'm 42 and capable of making my own decisions, but that only made him more insistent. Do you want me to go? Victoria looked at him across the table, something vulnerable breaking through her frustration. Yes, but only if you're ready for Lawrence Ashford in full intimidation mode. He's not trying to be cruel, he just believes he knows what's best for everyone and has trouble accepting when people disagree. Sounds familiar. Most fathers are like that with their daughters. Most fathers didn't spend 30 years as a judge perfecting the art of cross-examination. Garrett reached for her hand, squeezed gently. I can handle your father. Question is whether you're ready for him to meet me, meet the reality of what we're building, instead of whatever assumptions he's made. I'm ready. Terrified, but ready. They set the date for the following Sunday, Victoria warning him to dress nicely and prepare for scrutiny that would make job interviews feel casual. Garrett spent the week oscillating between determination and anxiety, knowing this dinner represented threshold he couldn't cross without commitment to whatever came next. Sunday arrived with fog and drizzle San Francisco weather matching his mood. He dressed in his only suit bought for Emily's funeral and rarely worn since made sure Iris and Finn looked presentable in their church clothes. Victoria had insisted the kids come, said Lawrence needed to understand this wasn't just about two adults, but about integrating into an existing family. They drove to Seacliff in Garrett's truck, pulling up to a house that made his monthly rent look like pocket change. Stone and glass mansion perched above the Pacific views that probably cost more than he'd earn in his lifetime. He parked between a Mercedes and a BMW, helped the kids out, took a breath before walking toward a future that felt simultaneously inevitable and impossibly far from everything he'd known. Lawrence Ashford opened the door himself, tall and silver-haired, assessing Garrett with eyes that had spent decades evaluating testimony and finding most of it wanting. They shook hands, his grip firm and deliberate test disguised as greeting. Mr. Sullivan, Victoria speaks highly of you. Judge Ashford, thank you for having us. The formality felt absurd standing on a doorstep in the rain, but neither man moved to relax it. Iris and Finn pressed close to Garrett's sides, shy in the presence of wealth and judgment that radiated from Lawrence like heat. And these must be your children. Please come in. They entered a foyer larger than Garrett's entire apartment, the kids' eyes going wide at marble floors and artwork that belonged in museums. A housekeeper appeared to take coats, disappeared again with practiced invisibility. Lawrence led them to a dining room where Victoria waited, looking tense in ways she never did at Garrett's place. Dinner proceeded with excruciating politeness, Lawrence asking careful questions designed to reveal character and capability. Where Garrett trained how he supported his family, what his long-term plans included. Each answer was weighed and measured, found adequate but not impressive blue-collar reality. Confronting old money standards, the kids stayed quiet, overwhelmed by formality and the particular tension of adults navigating social minefields. After the main course, Lawrence suggested the children might enjoy exploring his library, while the adults talked business. Eleanor Ashford appeared with dessert offered to show them, led Iris and Finn away with grandmotherly kindness that made Garrett wonder how such warmth coexisted with Lawrence's rigid assessment. Alone with Victoria and her father, Garrett felt the dynamic shift, conversation moving from polite to pointed. So, Mr. Sullivan, Victoria tells me you're building furniture for her company. Yes, sir. Custom pieces for their new headquarters. And how did this arrangement come about? Garrett met his eyes steadily, refused to be intimidated by decades of courtroom experience. We met on New Year's Eve. She needed a carpenter, I needed work. Mutually beneficial arrangement. I see. And the personal relationship developed from this professional one. It did. Lawrence leaned back, fingers steepled, judge, preparing to deliver verdict. I'm concerned, Mr. Sullivan. My daughter has had one failed marriage already. She doesn't need another relationship built on incompatible foundations. Victoria's hand slammed on the table, anger breaking through her careful composure. Dad, that's enough. Garrett's life circumstances don't determine his worth or his capacity to be in my life. I'm not questioning his worth. I'm questioning whether a single father with limited means can provide the stability you need. The words hung heavy classism and paternal concern, mixing into judgment that cut despite Garrett's preparation for exactly this kind of dismissal. With respect, sir, I don't need to provide for Victoria. She's perfectly capable of providing for herself. What I offer is presence, honesty, and understanding about what it means to build something real." Lawrence's expression flickered something like surprise crossing features that had forgotten how to show uncertainty. "And what makes you think you understand my daughter better than I do?" "Because I listen when she talks instead of deciding what she needs before she speaks." Silence dropped across the dining room. Truth laid bare with Carpenter's bluntness that refused to soften for politeness. Victoria stared at Garrett with something like wonder, Lawrence with something closer to reassessment. The moment stretched until Garrett wondered if he'd just destroyed whatever chance he had at acceptance. Then Lawrence laughed short bark of genuine amusement. "Well, at least you're honest. That's worth something." The tension broke slightly, didn't disappear, but became manageable rather than crushing. They finished dessert with conversation that stayed careful but lost its adversarial edge. When Garrett collected his kids and prepared to leave, Lawrence stopped him at the door. "Mr. Sullivan, I don't approve of this relationship, but I don't have to. My daughter is capable of making her own choices, even ones I think are mistakes." "I appreciate your honesty, sir." "However," Lawrence's voice hardened slightly, "if you hurt her, you'll discover that being a retired judge doesn't mean I've lost my ability to make people's lives very difficult." Garrett met his eyes without flinching. "If I hurt her, I'll deserve whatever you dish out." They shook hands again, this time with grudging mutual respect underneath the formal gesture. Garrett loaded his kids into the truck, Victoria walking him out despite the rain that had intensified while they ate. "I'm sorry about him. He means well, but expresses it terribly." "He loves you. That's what matters." She kissed him then, first time their lips had met, rain soaking them both while Iris and Finn watched from the truck with wide eyes and probably complex feelings. When the keiki separated, Victoria was smiling despite everything. "Thank you for being brave enough to face him. Thank you for believing I was worth the fight." Garrett drove home through rain-slicked streets, kids processing what they'd witnessed in silence that would eventually need conversation. But for now, he let them sit with their thoughts while he drove, remembering the taste of Victoria's kiss and the feeling of crossing threshold into territory that terrified and exhilarated in equal measure. The weeks following Lawrence's scrutiny brought unexpected lightness, as if surviving his judgment had given Victoria and Garrett permission to stop questioning whether they belonged together. April arrived with blossoms covering the city's trees, warmth finally breaking through San Francisco's perpetual fog. The furniture project was complete, installed in Ashford Digital Solutions' new headquarters with precision that made Victoria's board members comment on the craftsmanship. Garrett cashed the final check, deposited money that changed his bank balance from precarious to stable for the first time since Emily's medical bills had drained their savings. He took the kids to Ocean Beach on a Saturday, rare day off from job sites and deadlines. Victoria joined them mid-afternoon, traded her executive wardrobe for jeans and a windbreaker, sat beside him watching Iris teach Finn how to identify different types of shells. "They're getting brown." Her observation came gentle, pleased, rather than concerned. "When's the last time they had a beach day?" "Not since Emily was alive. We used to come here every month." Victoria leaned against his shoulder, comfortable intimacy that had developed through weeks of careful progression. "You're doing better now. Financially, I mean." "Thanks to you. Thanks to your skill. I just connected you with opportunity." Garrett turned his head, kissed her temple gesture that felt natural now. Finn spotted them and came running sandy and soaked, threw himself into Victoria's lap with complete trust that she'd catch him. "Vicky, come see the castle. It has a moat." She went, let herself be dragged across the sand, knelt beside Iris to admire architecture built from buckets and imagination. Garrett watched from his spot, heart doing complicated things in his chest, the particular fear-joy mix of falling in love while knowing exactly how devastating loss could be. This was real now, no longer just possibility or careful exploration. Victoria had integrated into their lives with enough permanence that her absence would leave holes. That evening, after beach exhaustion had knocked the kids into early sleep, Garrett stood in his bedroom staring at the nightstand drawer. He'd never opened Emily's letter, the envelope she'd written when cancer seemed certain and goodbyes needed to be said. He'd carried it for 3 years without the courage to read her final words. He found Victoria on the fire escape standard position when she needed air and perspective. The city spread below them Saturday night, beginning its acceleration toward noise and celebration. She turned as he approached, smiled with the particular warmth reserved for people who'd become safe harbors in uncertain waters. Kids out, dead to the world. Beach days hit them hard. He sat beside her, held the envelope in hands that trembled slightly. I want to show you something, but I need you to understand what it means first. Victoria's expression shifted playfulness, fading into attention. Okay. When Emily knew she was dying, she wrote me a letter. Instructions for after, I guess. Permission to move on, if you want to call it that. The words came harder than expected, grief still sharp around certain edges. I found it 3 years ago and couldn't open it until now. Tonight feels like the right time, and I want you here when I read it. Garrett, you don't have to. I want to. I want you to understand that this isn't me replacing her or forgetting what we had. It's me honoring her enough to believe love can happen more than once. He opened the envelope, carefully unfolded pages written on hospital stationery, began reading aloud. Emily's voice came through the prose, gentle and firm, the woman who'd known him well enough to predict exactly how he'd respond to losing her. She spoke of love without conditions, of releasing him to find happiness again, of not letting grief become a prison that kept him from living. She asked him to choose someone who made him laugh, someone who showed up, someone who loved their children almost as much as he did. Asked him not to feel guilty for moving forward, to understand that loving again honored what they'd built by believing in it enough to risk it twice. Garrett's voice broke on the final paragraphs, Victoria's hand finding his, as tears tracked down both their faces. When he finished, they sat in silence, the weight of Emily's generosity settling over them like benediction. She loved you so much. Victoria's voice came thick with emotion. Yeah, she did. And she wanted you to find this. Wanted you to find me, or someone like me, someone who would show up and stay. Victoria's voice broke on the last word, overwhelmed by generosity from a woman she'd never meet, but whose legacy surrounded them. I don't know if I can live up to that. Garrett took her hand, laced their fingers together, grounding gesture that anchored them both. You already do. Every time you help Iris with math, or paint with Finn, or sit on this fire escape listening to me process complicated feelings, you show up, Victoria. That's what Emily asked for. That's what we need. She turned to face him, fully mascara smudged and eyes red, beautiful in her unraveling. I'm falling in love with you. With all of you. And it terrifies me because I don't know how to do this right. How to be what a family needs when I've never had good models for it. You think I know what I'm doing? I'm making this up as I go, hoping I don't screw up my kids too badly in the process. But you're their father. You have that right. I'm just your Victoria, the woman my children ask for when they're excited or scared or need someone who isn't me. The woman who makes me remember that being alone was survival, not living. That's not just anything. The words hung between them, truth spoken plainly in the way relationships required to move beyond surface connection into actual substance. Victoria kissed him, then, different from the rain-soaked kiss outside Lawrence's mansion, slower, and waited with understanding of what they were choosing and what it would cost them both in vulnerability and risk. When they separated, foreheads touching, breathing the same air, Garrett felt the last piece of protection around his heart dissolve into willingness to try again, despite knowing exactly how badly trying could end. I love you too. Don't know when it happened exactly, but somewhere between carbonara and sand castles, you became essential. Victoria laughed through tears sound that mixed joy with the particular relief of fear faced and survived. We're really doing this, building something permanent. If you're willing to be patient while we figure out what permanent looks like for us, I can do patient, I think, maybe with practice. They stayed on the fire escape until cold drove them inside Garrett, tucking Emily's letter back into his nightstand with the sense of closing one chapter while opening another. The apartment felt different now, less like shrine to what he'd lost and more like foundation for what he was building. He walked Victoria to the door, kissed her goodnight with the promise of tomorrow and all the tomorrows after, watched her descend the stairs before closing himself in with sleeping children and the quiet satisfaction of choices made honestly. May unfolded in a series of small integrations that built toward something larger. Victoria met Simone over brunch in the Mission, the sisters clicking immediately over shared humor and the particular bond of women who'd survived demanding fathers. Simone approved with enthusiasm that made Victoria blush, declared Garrett exactly what her sister needed. Garrett's parents visited from Sacramento, tentative reconnection after years of distance. They met Victoria with wariness that transformed into cautious acceptance after watching her interact with their grandchildren. His mother pulled him aside before they left, voice thick with emotion. She's good for you, for all of you, Emily would approve. Work settled into new patterns, Garrett taking smaller jobs that allowed more flexibility. Money stopped being the constant low-grade panic that colored every decision. He moved the family to a larger apartment in the same building, 3 bedrooms that meant Iris and Finn each got their own space. June brought Simone's wedding outdoor ceremony in Napa Valley that required Garrett to rent a suit and teach Finn how to tie a proper tie. Victoria wore blue silk that made her look simultaneously elegant and approachable, introduced Garrett to extended family, with pride that warmed him from the inside. Lawrence attended with Eleanor, who turned out to be warm and funny when freed from her husband's rigid formality. The reception stretched into evening string lights and wine and dancing that pulled even reluctant participants onto the floor. Garrett found himself swaying with Victoria under stars, her head on his shoulder. Iris and Finn running wild with other children. I like your sister. Victoria's laugh vibrated against his chest. Everyone likes Simone. She's the easy Ashford. You're not difficult, just complicated. Same thing. Not even close. He pulled back enough to see her face backlit by fairy lights and genuine happiness. Complicated means there's depth worth exploring. Difficult means you're not worth the effort. You're definitely the former. She kissed him there on the dance floor, surrounded by strangers and family public declaration that they'd stopped pretending this was casual or temporary. When they separated, Garrett noticed Lawrence watching from a table at the reception's edge, expression unreadable, but not hostile. Later that night, after children were delivered to Garrett's parents, who were watching them for the weekend, Victoria invited him to her penthouse. The space looked different than he'd imagined, less sterile than her professional demeanor, suggested small touches of personality emerging in the books stacked on her nightstand, and the photographs of Simone on the mantel. They made love slowly, careful exploration that honored the vulnerability required to let another person see you completely. Afterward, tangled in sheets, Victoria traced patterns on his chest and asked questions about Emily that most people avoided from misguided courtesy. Do you still miss her? Every day. But it's different now. Less like drowning, more like carrying something heavy I've learned to balance. Do you think about her when you're with me? The question came tentative fear of inadequacy, showing through carefully constructed confidence. Sometimes, not in the way you're worried about. Garrett caught her hand, stilled the nervous movement. I think about how she'd like you, how she'd appreciate that you're patient with the kids and don't try to be her. I think about how grateful I am that she gave me permission to feel this way about someone else. And how do you feel like I'm exactly where I'm supposed to be? They fell asleep wrapped together. Morning arrived with sunshine through floor-to-ceiling windows, view of the Golden Gate Bridge emerging from fog. They made breakfast together in Victoria's designer kitchen, coffee and eggs, and the particular intimacy of domestic routine shared between people learning to build life rather than just visit each other's lives. I've been thinking about something. Victoria flipped eggs with more confidence than her previous confession of cooking incompetence suggested. My lease is up in August. I'm wondering if I should renew or look for something different. Garrett poured coffee, tried to read subtext without making assumptions. Different how? Maybe something with more space. Maybe something closer to your neighborhood so I'm not always driving across the city. Maybe something that feels less like a hotel and more like a home. The suggestion carried weight beyond real estate decisions, implications that made Garrett's heart rate increase with hope and terror in equal measure. That's a big change. I know, but this place was supposed to be temporary when I bought it, fresh start after the divorce. 5 years later, and it still feels like I'm waiting for my real life to begin. She plated eggs, carried them to the small breakfast nook. I'm ready to stop waiting, if you are. I'm ready. Scared but ready. Good. Because I already scheduled some apartment viewings for next weekend, and I was hoping you and the kids might come help me decide. They ate breakfast, planning futures that included shared space and integrated lives. Victoria pulling up listings on her phone, Garrett offering opinions on neighborhoods and school districts. The conversation felt surreal and absolutely natural, next logical step for people committed to building something permanent. July brought a week off for Garrett, rare luxury of time. They drove to Lake Tahoe, rented a cabin. The week unfolded in swimming and hiking s'mores around campfires. Victoria fit seamlessly into vacation rhythms, helped pack lunches, and refereed sibling disputes. One evening after the kids were asleep, they sat on the cabin's deck watching stars emerge. I could get used to this. Family vacations. Belonging somewhere besides a boardroom. Garrett kissed the top of her head, breathed in the scent of her shampoo mixed with campfire smoke. You belong with us. I hope you know that by now. Most days I do. Some days I still wait for you to realize I'm not enough. Those days are lying to you. She turned in his arms, studied his face with the particular intensity of people searching for reassurance they desperately needed but couldn't ask for directly. Promise me something, anything. If I screw this up, if I do something that hurts you, or the kids tell me, don't just decide I'm hopeless and walk away. Give me a chance to fix it. The request revealed vulnerability. Victoria rarely showed fear that shaped her actions in ways Garrett was only beginning to understand. He cupped her face, made sure she could see the truth in his eyes. I promise. But you need to promise me the same thing. If this gets too hard, if you need space or time or anything, talk to me instead of running. I promise. They sealed it with a kiss that tasted like marshmallows and starlight, commitment deeper than any formal vow could capture. August arrived with Victoria's move into a 3-bedroom apartment in Hayes Valley, 2 blocks from Garrett's building. Lawrence surprised everyone by showing up to help retired judge carrying boxes alongside Garrett and Declan. During a water break, Lawrence pulled Garrett aside, voice gruff with emotion he rarely displayed. I was wrong about you. About what my daughter needed. The admission cost him pride, battling honesty until honesty won. I appreciate you saying that. Don't misunderstand. I still think you're an odd match, but I've watched you together, watched how you are with those children. You make her happy in ways I never managed to. Garrett heard the regret underneath, father recognizing he'd prioritized wrong things. It's not a competition. She loves you, Lawrence. She just needed you to accept that her path might look different than you planned. I'm learning. Slowly, but learning. Lawrence took a long drink of water. Eleanor says I should build something with my hands again. Woodworking, she means. Says maybe spending time in your workshop would be good for me. The request came awkward, tentative olive branch from a man unaccustomed to asking for connection. You'd be welcome anytime. Fair warning, I work early mornings. I'm retired. Early mornings are all I have. September brought routines that felt sustainable. Garrett started teaching Lawrence basic joinery on Tuesday mornings, the older man's hands remembering skills he'd abandoned 50 years ago. On the third week, Lawrence broke their working quiet with observation that sounded like apology. I built my life trying to please my father, became a lawyer because he wanted that, achieved all the markers of success he valued, and I was miserable the entire time. Then Eleanor told me she was leaving unless I figured out what actually mattered to me. I chose her, chose our daughters, chose trying to be present instead of just successful. But old habits die hard. Understanding settled between them, shared recognition that control was fear wearing a business suit, that real strength meant letting the people you loved make their own mistakes. For what it's worth, loving her scares me too. Every day I wonder if I'm enough. And yet you keep showing up. Because the alternative is teaching them that fear should dictate all our choices. I don't want that legacy. Lawrence nodded. Slowly picked up his chisel, returned to the work of shaping wood into something useful and beautiful. October arrived with Indian summer warmth. Garrett's birthday passed quietly, Victoria surprising him with a weekend trip to Mendocino. They walked beaches and browsed art galleries, talked about futures that included possible marriage. On the drive home, stuck in traffic, Victoria reached over and took his hand with the particular intensity that preceded important questions. What would you think about me talking to Iris and Finn about what I am to them, I mean? About whether they're comfortable with me being more official? Garrett felt his throat tighten with emotion he couldn't quite name. What brought this on? I've been thinking about Emily's letter. About her hoping you'd find someone who loved your children almost as much as you do. And I realized I do love them, Garrett. Not like a fun aunt or family friend. Like they're mine to protect and cherish and show up for unconditionally. That's a big commitment. I know. But I'm ready for it if they are. If you are. Traffic started moving again, giving Garrett excuse to focus on driving, while his mind raced through implications and fears and desperate hope. Yes, talk to them. But be prepared that Iris might have questions I can't predict, and Finn might just ask if this means you're staying forever. What should I tell him if he asks that? Tell him yes, if that's what you mean. Victoria was quiet the rest of the drive, processing the weight of promises about to be made. That evening, after they'd returned and collected the kids from his parents after dinner and homework, Victoria asked if she could talk to Iris and Finn together. Garrett excused himself to the kitchen, gave them privacy for conversation that would shape their combined future. Through the thin walls, he heard Victoria's voice, careful and honest, explaining that she loved them and wanted to be permanent part of their lives if they wanted that too. Heard Iris's questions about what that meant, whether Victoria was trying to replace their mother, how they were supposed to feel about loving someone who wasn't the parent they'd lost. Heard Victoria's patient responses, clarification that loving her didn't mean forgetting Emily, that families could grow without erasing people who came before. Finn's question came exactly as predicted, innocent and direct. So you're staying forever? Victoria's answer carried through the walls, clear and certain. If you'll have me, yes, forever. When Garrett returned to the living room 10 minutes later, all three of them were crying. But the good, kind tears that came from emotion too big to contain, rather than pain requiring comfort. Iris hugged Victoria with the fierce protectiveness she usually reserved for her brother Finn, climbed into her lap like she'd always been there and always would be. Later, after the kids were in bed, after Victoria had left for her own apartment with promises to see them tomorrow, Garrett stood in his bedroom holding Emily's letter one more time. He read through her words about choosing happiness and letting someone new love their children, about not feeling guilty for moving forward into futures she wouldn't see. I did it, Em. Found someone who shows up and stays and loves them almost as much as I do. Found someone who makes me remember that being alive means more than just surviving. He folded the letter back into its envelope, placed it in the box with Emily's wedding ring and the hospital bracelet from Finn's birth artifacts of a life that ended but didn't need to haunt him anymore. November brought Thanksgiving at Lawrence and Eleanor's house extended Ashford family gathering that included Simone and her new husband, Victoria's cousins and their children. Lawrence carved turkey with ceremonial precision, and somewhere in the noise and warmth, Garrett realized this was what family looked like when built on acceptance rather than obligation. Victoria caught his eye across the dining table crowded with too many people and too much food, smiled with contentment that transformed her face into something radiant. After dinner, Lawrence asked Garrett to step outside to the garden. They walked gravel paths until Lawrence stopped near a bench overlooking the Pacific. I never apologized properly for how I treated you at that first dinner. The judgment the question's designed to find flaws instead of understand character. You were protecting your daughter. I get that. Perhaps. But there's a difference between protection and control. Lawrence sat heavily on the bench, suddenly looking his 68 years. You've been good for her, teaching me things I should have learned 50 years ago. That building things with your hands connects you to something real. That letting people make their own mistakes is how they learn to trust themselves. They sat together watching the ocean perform its eternal conversation, with the shore, two men from different worlds finding common ground. December arrived with the particular anticipation that preceded anniversaries. 1 year since Garrett had stood outside Bella Vista being turned away, 1 year since Victoria had invited a stranger to her table. They'd agreed to return to the restaurant on New Year's Eve, close the circle that had opened 12 months ago. The week before, Garrett visited jewelry stores in the Mission, browsed engagement rings with the particular terror of men who'd only done this once before under completely different circumstances. He found what he wanted in a small shop run by an elderly jeweler. Simple platinum band with inlay of walnut and oak wood from the conference table he'd built for Victoria craftsmanship, meeting symbolism. The jeweler examined his sketch, nodded approval. This is beautiful work. For someone special, the most special. Christmas came with traditions old and new, blending into something that felt distinctly theirs. Morning at Garrett's apartment with stockings and presents. Afternoon at Victoria's place, evening at Lawrence and Eleanor's for extended family celebration. Victoria gave Garrett Japanese chisels he'd admired, tools she'd researched carefully. He gave her a cutting board he'd made from leftover oak and walnut. She cried over it, understood the symbolism of building something useful and beautiful from scraps. New Year's Eve arrived with anticipation that felt different from the previous year's desperate loneliness. Garrett, dressed in his suit, helped Iris and Finn into their nicest clothes, drove to Victoria's apartment. She wore the blue silk dress from the wedding hair down around her shoulders. The restaurant greeted them warmly this time, seated them at the same corner table where Victoria had eaten alone, where she'd watched Garrett be turned away and made the split-second decision to intervene. Dinner proceeded with easy conversation. They reminisced about that first awkward meal, the careful boundaries and uncertain attraction. At 11:30, as the restaurant began preparing for midnight countdown, Garrett felt the ring box pressing against his jacket pocket. He stood, offering his hand. Walk outside with me before the countdown. Victoria looked surprised but took his hand. Cold air hit them as they stepped outside city, beginning its preparations for celebration. Garrett led her a few steps from the door, turned to face her under streetlights. 1 year ago, I stood right here feeling like a failure. Then you invited me to your table and accidentally gave me something infinitely more valuable. Inside the restaurant, the countdown began. 10, 9, 8. Garrett pulled the ring box from his pocket, knelt on the cold sidewalk. Victoria Ashford, will you marry me? 3, 2, 1. Happy New Year. Victoria dropped to her knees in front of him, threw her arms around his neck, and whispered, "Yes." Garrett slipped the ring onto her finger, kissed her while fireworks exploded overhead and strangers cheered. When they separated, Victoria examined the ring with wonder. "Is this from the conference table? Oak and walnut." "It's perfect." They drove home, collected the kids from Mrs. Kowalski. In the car, Victoria showed them the ring, explained that she and their dad were getting married. Finn's response came immediate and ecstatic. "Does this mean you're my mom now?" Victoria looked to Garrett for guidance, found him nodding permission. "I'll never be the mom who gave birth to you. That was Emily, and she'll always be your first mom. But I want to be the mom who's here now, who loves you and shows up and helps you grow, if you want that too." Finn considered this with 7-year-old seriousness. "I want 2 moms. The one who made me, and the one who stays." Iris's response came quieter, more measured. "I think Mom would like you. She wanted Dad to find someone who loved us. I think you count." The benediction broke something open in Victoria. She twisted in the passenger seat, reached back to take both kids' hands. "I promise to love you and your dad with everything I have. To show up when it's hard and celebrate when it's joyful. To remember your first mom and honor her by being present in all the ways she'd want for you." 6 months later, on a warm June afternoon, they gathered in Eleanor's garden overlooking the Pacific for a wedding that prioritized presence over pageantry. Simone officiated, reading vows Garrett and Victoria had written about, showing up and choosing each other daily despite fear. Iris and Finn stood beside them, the kids' roles officially recognized as family rather than just witnesses. Lawrence walked Victoria down a garden path rather than a formal aisle, giving her away to a man he'd learned to respect through Tuesday morning carpentry sessions and patience with patriarchal stubbornness. Eleanor cried happy tears. Mrs. Kowalski dabbed at her eyes with a handkerchief. Declan and his wife beamed from their seats. The ceremony lasted 15 minutes, exchange of rings and promises, and the particular solemnity that came from people who understood exactly what they were committing to. When Simone pronounced them married, Garrett kissed his wife while their children cheered and family applauded, and the sun continued its arc toward evening. The reception that followed was small and perfect, catered dinner in the garden, dancing on the terrace. Lawrence's toast surprised everyone by acknowledging he'd been wrong, that Victoria and Garrett had built something beautiful, despite his doubts. As sunset painted the sky in shades of gold and orange, Garrett found Victoria standing at the garden's edge, looking out at the ocean with her wedding dress catching the last light. He joined her, slipped his arm around her waist, pulled her close. "How are you feeling, Mrs. Sullivan?" She turned in his arms, smiled with the particular joy of people who'd survived fear to reach the other side. "Like I finally figured out what I was building all those years. Turns out it wasn't a company or a career. It was just learning to be brave enough for this." "For what?" "For love. For family. For building something that lasts beyond quarterly reports and stock prices." Garrett kissed her there in the fading light, surrounded by family and the sound of children laughing, tasting salt air and champagne and the particular sweetness of promises kept. Behind them, the reception continued, music drifting across the garden, but for this moment, they stood apart, just 2 people who'd found each other across restaurant tables and class differences, who'd chosen to build something permanent despite every reasonable objection. Tomorrow they would leave for a honeymoon in Oregon, week at the coast with just the 4 of them, learning to be official family. Next month, Victoria's name would go on the lease beside his. In a year, they'd start talking about maybe finding a house, something with a yard and workshop space room, for a family that kept growing in ways that mattered more than biology. But tonight was for celebration, for dancing with his wife, while their children ran wild with cousins, for toasting futures and honoring pasts and believing that love could happen more than once if you were brave enough to risk it. The sky darkened, fully stars emerging one by one, ancient light reaching Earth long after its source had burned out, proof that beauty could outlast the things that created it. Garrett took Victoria's hand, led her back toward music and family and the life they were building together. Behind them, the ocean continued its eternal rhythm, waves breaking and reforming. Persistence teaching the patient that some things endured despite every force working to erode them. And in that persistence lived hope, the kind worth building permanent structures around, the kind that turned strangers into family and loneliness into belonging and careful first steps into forever.